Welcome. From vision to victory. That's a big goal for a 1-hour workshop, but we're going to do our best to give you an insight into how some of the world's leading companies are using customer experience, or CX, to improve their businesses and to consider what's needed to maximize your chance of success. Exeevo thanks Reuters Events for making this workshop possible and hope you're being inspired by the sessions you've attended and the stories being told. I'm Chris Wade, Associate Vice President for Strategic Solutions at Exeevo. We chose to run today's session because we see companies identifying CX as one of the key approaches to driving greater business and customer value. Through investment in digital capabilities and integrating previously fragmented customer processes, companies need to translate this into impact and value both now and into the future. To show us how to make this possible, I'm delighted to be able to introduce and welcome the leader of this masterclass, Matt Watkinson. Matt is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and consultant on customer experience and strategy. He won the CMI's Management Book of the Year award for his first book, The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences, and has been interviewed by many of the world's leading research firms, and as a speaker has addressed industry leaders worldwide. He's a senior visiting fellow at Cass Business School and sits on the board of 2 other companies. He is the CEO and co-founder of Methodical, a CX design consultancy based in Los Angeles. So the structure of today's session is very straightforward. We're going to open with a short poll, then we're going to hand over to Matt to lead us through the majority of the masterclass session. Then I'm going to be speaking for a couple of minutes around the challenge of organization-wide collaboration for success. And then we're going to hand it over to you for a Q&A session so we can pick Matt's brain. So now for the icebreaker poll. What are the top challenges stopping your organization from achieving great customer experience? Is it siloed departments, a lack of infrastructure, or a lack of expertise? Please make a selection and we'll show you the results in a moment.
Well, the logical starting point for discussing customer experience in the broadest possible sense, if we're considering launching an initiative or evaluating ones that are underway, is to ask ourselves, what does success actually look like when it comes to these kinds of programs? And to my mind, really, we're trying to achieve 2 things simultaneously with any CX initiative. So on the one hand, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we're trying to create more value for the customer. We're trying to create a greater perception of the worth of being a customer of ours versus the alternatives on the market. Yet at the same time, what we're also trying to do is do that in a way that our business prospers as a result, where we can demonstrate that spending our limited resources, whether it's human resources, whether it's time, energy, money, on pursuing those improvements for the customer actually had a tangible payoff for the business. And what we see in practice is people struggling with either or both of these to some degree. Some people struggle to improve their experience in the way that customers really notice that does change that perception of value. And other people struggle to do that in a way that creates a tangible payoff for the business at the same time. So the presentation today is just going to talk through both of those and give some practical points for each of them, starting with what I observe as generally the hardest or biggest challenge, which is the business side of things. How do we actually achieve greater business performance by investing in the customer experience? And I've got 3 really simple bits of guidance for this. First, we want to make sure that we align our CX initiatives to the commercial goals of our organization. Second, we want to use project-specific metrics that will measure the success of our project as we pursue those specific goals. And finally, we want to make sure that we're focused on pragmatics and actually fixing things as quickly as we can in the real world. So let's take a look at these in a little more detail now, starting with this first aspiration to align our customer experience program to the commercial goals of the business. Now, the reason I call this out specifically and right at the beginning is that there can be a bit of a tendency within the customer experience profession to assume that the focus of any CX initiative or program should be to delight our customers, or simply that our overall goal should be to improve loyalty or retention of the customer. And they often assume that that should be the focus without actually asking what the problem is or what the biggest growth opportunities are or challenges facing the business might be. They kind of knee-jerk into those. And if those aren't the biggest opportunities, then obviously we're not going to get the payoffs that we hope commercially. So the way that we encourage our clients to think about this stuff is to say, we need to treat customer experience as a means to an end, where we say, what are the commercial goals that we're trying to achieve? And then how can we use our skill set or toolkit or associated technologies to better help us achieve them? And when we take that perspective, we tend to see that there are actually a huge number of different commercial goals that we might pursue, some of which are generic, some of which are industry specific. In the case of life sciences brands, we might look at it and say, well, our overall goal is to increase the number of customers we have or audience count. Our overall goal is to improve adherence. Our overall goal is to increase prescribing frequency, whatever it might be, or some combination of all of those. But the important thing is that we start with the goal and then we say, okay, how are we going to use interaction design or customer experience skills to help us achieve that? And in the case of increasing prescribing frequency, for example, we might look at how we can simplify or automate the reordering process. When it comes to acquiring more customers, we might look at the path to purchase or what it's like to set up or create an account, or even the choice architecture of finding the right product for the healthcare professional, so on and so forth. But the key point is, start with the commercial goal and then treat the customer experience as a means to achieving it. And that naturally leads on to the second point I wanted to make, that in order to prove our success, we want to make sure that we pick metrics or measures that are specifically tied to that commercial goal that we just identified there, right? The more closely related our metric is to the goal we're pursuing, the easier it's going to be to monitor and demonstrate our progress, right? Yet there's this very clear tendency within the profession to rely on large, I guess you call them compound metrics like customer satisfaction scores or NPS scores that are affected by a whole host of different things, from price to product quality to customer service to brand perceptions, yada, yada, yada. So we want to get away from those big metrics that can be influenced by all sorts of things that aren't part of our project, and towards specific metrics that align directly to our commercial goal. And that might be, well, if we're talking about acquiring new customers, the number of new customers we acquire. If we're talking about reducing the incidence of complaints, it would be the number of complaints, that kind of thing. It's very, very simple, but it's easy to overlook this stuff and kind of fall into the dogma of just using these large compound metrics, which actually aren't especially helpful in practice. So that's the second thing. We want to make sure that we tie our goals, our metrics, directly to the goals we're trying to pursue. The third thing that I want to address on the business side is this imperative to try and move more quickly and get things fixed in the real world, and avoid this other tendency that's kind of crept in the last few years, that customer experience has kind of become an intellectual conquest or exercise rather than a kind of pragmatic discipline of identifying problems or opportunities and capitalizing on them. And we see this play out in how CX program plans are often structured. We tend to see that organizations start with this big upfront period of trying to get the house in order, building capabilities, building processes and workflows and hiring people and all that kind of stuff, which is, arguably very, very necessary. Then they think, well, now we're going to do some huge transformation projects or strategic projects that are really going to move the needle in a big way next. And then we'll get round to fixing all the kind of little things that everybody knows are broken already. Now, there's a problem with this approach. And the problem is Around here, all the energy and excitement around customer experience has dissipated because nobody's seen any results. Around here, the CFO starts asking why we need more money for our program when we've already spent a year or two and haven't delivered anything for the money we've already spent. And around here, we typically see CX leaders get a little bit frustrated. They feel like they're being asked to do too much with too little, or in some cases are even dismissed for not really delivering. And this doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the CX team. It doesn't help the organization, and it certainly doesn't help the customer. The thing that you need to realize when it comes to customer experience is that you're basically in a race against expectations, right, which are rising as a result of competitive action, new market entrants, whatever it might be. So the longer it takes to deliver a project, the less impact that project is probably going to have, because it's possible that expectations will go up in the meantime. The second thing, which everybody knows if they've ever worked on one of these big programs or technology projects, is that as you increase the scope, the effect on complexity and communication overhead and cost and everything is non-linear. It becomes kind of exponentially harder to get things done. So what we actually advocate for is, if brands are new to this CX stuff, the aim should just be to start small with simple changes that get the flywheel moving. If customers notice that you fix something and start talking about it, then the organization is bound to notice, and you kind of build momentum by building momentum, if you see what I mean. So here's how that looks in terms of a structured approach. Start by getting up and running with a kind of tactical work stream of just improving things that anybody who is in a customer-facing role will be able to tell you is broken or can be improved or is a major pain point for the customer. You don't need huge amounts of vision or strategy or research to get to those. They tend to be very well known, and this puts the focus on execution from day one, which is what you really want. Second, that will buy you time when that is up and running to do a bit more thorough kind of research or foundation building. You might do some customer segmentation. You might do some bit more rigorous research into the commercial strategy of the organization, whatever it might be. And then from there, that will allow you to build out a more thorough vision or strategy for the program. And then with that in place, you can start to develop the capabilities as you go and start to pursue more and more ambitious strategic projects. But crucially, with the benefit of learning from execution and always having had a focus on actually doing. So what you learn from those tactical improvements will undoubtedly inform aspects of your vision and strategy, inform the capabilities that you need, and give you the confidence that you need when you go into those more ambitious programs. So we really want to get into the habit of being focused on continuous improvement, experimentation, iteration, and fixing what we're doing, and get away from this kind of big bang, waterfall-y kind of approach, for want of a better term. The next question then becomes, well, we've addressed the business side. How do we create that perception of value for the customer? If we're going to improve our customer experience, how do we do it in a way that they actually notice? And again, we've got a few very simple but pragmatic guidelines here. First, we want to take an integrated approach with other marketing or value creation activities. Second, we want to put the focus on creating better memories of the experience, not necessarily a better experience itself. Sounds a little bit cryptic, but I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And then third, we want to make sure that we put a pronounced emphasis on expectation management for reasons that will become clear as we progress through this. So let's start with this first one, this need to take an integrated approach. We find in our conversations with clients, when we're talking about CX in the abstract or how much value is it going to bring, to distinguish between these four different ways that an organization goes about creating value for the customer, these four kind of underlying sources. First, we've got the product or service, basically what it does and what it costs, obviously the major source of value for customers. Then we've got the appeal of our particular brand. What is our reputation like? What expectations and associations do people have with us? Third, we've got awareness. Right? People can't value what we're doing if they don't know it exists, and our communications should be crafted in such a way that they create as great a perception of value from our products as possible. And then we've got really what we're talking about today, which is customer experience, this continuum of interactions that kind of binds all those together or sits around them. Now, when we look at it through this very, very simple structure, there are a couple of straightforward but nonetheless very important conclusions that we can draw from that. First of all, customers don't really buy, they choose in most competitive markets, unless we're the sole provider of what we're doing, which isn't very often, which means that we need to do everything that we can to create more value for the customer. We don't want to be neglecting any one of these. We don't want to neglect our product. We don't want to neglect our brand. We don't want to neglect awareness or customer experience. And we also need to be realistic in our assessment of which of these are our strengths and which of these are our weaknesses, and work on plugging the gaps and prioritizing whichever source of value is really going to have the greatest impact on the customer. That's the first thing. We don't want to assume that it's the customer experience or the product or the brand. We want to be deliberate in that. But the second thing, which is going back to my main point about taking an integrated approach, is that we can amplify the value of everything that we're doing across these four kind of ways of creating value for the customer if we take an integrated approach where we try and join them up. So it's better if our products or services fit seamlessly into the broader customer experience. It's better if what we promise in our communications about our product is met by reality and met by the experience of being a customer. It's also better, as I'll talk about in a second here, that our customer experience is in some way distinctive, that reinforces our particular brand appeal and helps us stand out. So it's imperative really that we take an integrated approach to our CX program. And that means that anyone who is tasked with doing this within the business needs to know as much as they can about these other aspects of value creation and build relationships and collaborative working practices with these other disciplines. In practice, though, we don't often see that. In fact, customer experience professionals can be notoriously combative and say all sorts of silly things that kind of poo-poo these other disciplines, and we really don't want that. Okay, so the key is absolutely to go into a CX program with a really clear understanding of your brand, your communication strategy, your products or services, play nice with everybody else, and try and get all of these things joined up rather than kind of getting into turf wars and politics and all of that kind of counterproductive stuff. And this is exactly what you see when you look at the brands who are best at this, who are famous for having a great customer experience. All of these sources of value are present. They have great products, they have really strong brands, they have very high awareness, and they have a great customer experience. But they're also executing on these things in a way that is focused and distinctive. Amazon, for example, well, their experience is basically easy and reliable, effortless and stress-free, you might say, if you want to go into the psychological principles. Apple is also pretty easy, but there's also this kind of beautiful sensory dimension, or historically has been, to their products as well. Walt Disney is all about this idea of magic, and Rafa has a very strong kind of social lifestyle element to their experience of being a customer. So we want to ask ourselves, before we get too deep into these CX initiatives, what do we really want to be known for? What's our experiential signature going to be? And that's something that a lot of brands can't actually answer, which means that they just kind of pursue all sorts of initiatives willy-nilly that don't really ladder up to building strong memory structures in the customer's mind. And strong memory structures in the customer's mind is what we're all about. Brings me neatly on to this next point that I want to make, which addresses exactly this, that we need to create better memories, not better experiences. Now, to explain why that's the case, I need to introduce or explain this psychological phenomenon that was first identified by pretty famous psychologist Dan Kahneman and a colleague of his, Don Radelmeyer, back in the 90s, when they were performing a very, very simple experiment on some people who were having a colonoscopy of all things. What they did was they asked each of these patients in their sample, how much pain are you in for every minute during that procedure? So patient A would be like this, patient B a much longer procedure, and patient A is given a kind of 2, a 2, a 3. It's scored from 0 to 10, sorry, the pain that they were rating. And then after the procedure was over, they then ask them a second question, which is, well, how painful was that overall? And they expected the answer to that second question to basically reflect the sum of the individual ratings that they're given. So a longer procedure would be more pain, and a more painful procedure obviously would result in more pain. Now that was their hypothesis. So in this scenario, clearly patient B did actually experience more pain. What they found instead, though, was that that's not actually how people assessed the experience at all. What they found instead was that the answer to that second question, how painful was the experience overall, basically reflected the average of the peak and the end, hence this term, the peak end rule, in which case actually patient A would have found this to be a more uncomfortable experience. Now, to explain this, Kahneman introduces this distinction between two different facets of our psyche, if you like. The experiencing self, on the one hand, is answering that first question, how much pain am I in right now? Then you've got the remembering self that is recalling the memory of the experience, which has been influenced by this phenomenon, the peak end rule, and is answering that second question, how painful was the entire experience in retrospect? How painful was it overall? Why does this matter? Well, as Kahneman explains in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's that second one. It's the remembering self that makes decisions for the future. What we learn from the past is to maximize the quality of our memories, not necessarily of our future experience. And this has really profound implications, because if we want to change people's decision making or their behavior in the future, we need to make sure that we're changing their memory of events for the better. And obviously, in any experience, not every interaction that we have is equally memorable or even memorable at all, which presents us with a particular challenge. How do we go about creating better memories of an experience rather than just improving it on paper? And the absolute key is this final point that I'd like to make now about managing expectations. Now, it seems pretty intuitive to most of us that our expectations determine our perception of every experience that we have. If you have very high expectations, you're more likely to be disappointed. If you have very low expectations, you're more likely to be kind of disproportionately satisfied or impressed with it in some way. Now, as obvious as that sounds, having been working in this space for a long time, we've never had a single client who shows us how they go about setting and meeting expectations along the kind of length of a customer journey. If you've done any journey mapping exercises, dig out the journey maps and see whether expectations features. Typically doesn't. In fact, this is the most commonly overlooked aspect of the customer experience kind of process or workflow altogether. But obviously, as we've already seen, if we don't know what people expect, how can we possibly hope to satisfy or impress them or perhaps not disappoint them? Now, it turns out that when we have an experience as customers, it's not so much an expectation that we have. It's more a kind of continuum of expectations where two boundary points, I suppose you'd call them, are worth bearing in mind. On one hand, here's what I'd consider adequate as a customer. If I'm waiting at Starbucks or something, I might queue for 5 minutes and then I get a little frustrated, just an example there. On the other hand, we have, here's what I consider to be ideal. I walk straight to the front of the queue and I'm served immediately, perhaps. And then in between these two areas, we have what Leonard Berry, who identified this model, calls the zone of tolerance. Great term, where, yeah, things aren't setting our world on fire, but they're not a disaster either. It's just basically exactly in line with what we're expecting. Now, here's the interesting thing. Our brains have evolved to pay attention to things that don't meet our expectations for fairly obvious reasons, because then, we might need that for a survival thing, or might be an opportunity to learn something for the future. So we pay disproportionate attention to things that are unexpected. What that basically means is that we don't really remember anything that conforms or sits within this zone of tolerance, because there's no incentive to. If everything just fits exactly with our existing mental models and expectations, why would the brain go to the trouble of storing that event in the memory? So how do we use this insight when it comes to improving customer experiences? Well, the first thing is that we want to try and get a handle on what customers consider to be adequate or ideal at each stage of the experience. And often we don't know that. Even just asking that question of our colleagues or of ourselves, or even just thinking about it or doing some primary research, can yield some really, really interesting insights. Then what we want to know is, well, how does our experience compare to those expectations? And in this simplified diagram here, you can see that actually there's only 4 interactions that are going to determine the customer's perception of this experience. So the only 4 that they're going to remember. So how would we go about improving an experience that looks like this? Well, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we end on a high, considering that peak end rule, the end aspect of that, disproportionately memorable. Then we just want to make these 2 things forgettable, right? And now we've changed 3 interactions, and we've changed the customer's perception of that event entirely, in theory, from having negative memories to just no memories at all, and a couple of positive memories from it at the end. And from there we might want to sprinkle in a couple of more memory making interactions along the way. But the best thing about this is, and what it reveals is that often it's kind of trivial, unexpected details that we just weren't expecting that have a disproportionate impact on our memory of an experience. And I've got a pretty fun example of this. I was having my hair cut not long ago, something I've been doing obviously for my entire life. And it's getting progressively harder to impress me because I don't have any hair, basically. I'm pretty much bald, so I just get a buzz cut and I'm done. But I recently went for a haircut, and the guy who cut my hair did something that I've never seen done before. At the end of my haircut, as he handed me back my glasses, because you've got to take them off to trim my hair, whatever, he got out a little cloth and some spray and polished my glasses up and said, "I just want everything to be perfect," and handed them back to me with a smile. Now, that one trivial, unexpected detail that's basically cost him nothing to do has totally changed my perception of the experience, because that's the only thing I remember. And if we're looking for them, we see these kinds of opportunities all over the place in just about every customer experience to just show a little bit of discretionary effort or a little bit of attention to detail that can really change customers' perceptions of the experience that they're having and our brand. So here's the key point. When it comes to customer experience, expectation management is absolutely crucial. We want to know all the stages of the customer journey for the scenario we're working on, understand what the customer would consider to be kind of adequate or ideal for each stage of that. Get rid of anything bad first. Bad psychologically is much more impactful and more memorable than good, typically. And then we want to just kind of try and sprinkle in some memory-making interactions, some kind of trivial thing that maybe leaves a smile on the customer's face or shows a little bit of discretionary effort, as I was talking about. And also to remember, fantastic point about this, that talk is cheap, and that can be a good thing. If we can improve the customer's perception of the experience just by setting a more accurate expectation, rather than kind of leaving them in the dark or leaving them wondering what's happening, improving communication is typically much cheaper than redesigning products or services or creating digital tools or whatever it might be. So always be on the lookout for opportunities to better manage people's expectations through communication, because you tend to get a pretty big payoff from that. So, in summary, here's our approach to customer experience. Find a business challenge or opportunity first. Then figure out if and how customer experience improvements might actually help to achieve that business objective. Third, define exactly what success is going to look like for you and how you'll measure that specifically with a metric that's tied to that goal. Launch the smallest number of the highest impact interventions as quickly as you can, and then just keep rinsing and repeating as you work your way through all the interactions that customers might have with you. And if you can do that, you're going to find that your customers win because they get a greater perception of value in much less time, which is great. And when that happens, the business is going to win too, and your CX program will be set up for great success. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. You've given us a great deal to think about, not least how important it is that teams and functions collaborate to ensure they're focusing on quality in planning their engagements. We're now going to look at what this focus on a single customer mission can mean in terms of how companies need to change their organizational approach. As an industry, we've been speaking about omnichannel for years, but as there was often a real lack of clarity around what it meant, let alone how it could be delivered, it's not surprising it has eluded us. But what Matt has outlined is a blueprint for how companies need to rethink why omnichannel matters and how they need to be planning for it. Sure, technology is going to play an important part, but without that clear purpose and focus on creating positive memories, it's not going to deliver on its promise. So where do we start? We know that siloed working is the enemy of great CX, so it is critical that our mission sits above and across all of our customer functions. It can't be owned by or about one department. If it is, then it's almost inevitable that those priorities that drive one part or another of our business will take over, and we'll be back where we started. We know we're on a journey of discovery here. We've developed tactics and touch points as new sources of information or channels have opened up new possibilities. But we've long known that coordinating how we work has been hard enough, even within one department. When we ask the question, what are we doing with our customers and what are they doing with us? It's often simply too hard to get a clear picture. It's not to say that these have been wrong or counterproductive, but as Matt made clear, without a clear view across everything and every way your customers choose to engage with you, it is going to be very, very hard to manage your CX program with the visibility and insight you need to be confident it's staying on track. And with all of those unsynchronized players, we have the apps, solutions, and platforms that each department has built and evolved to solve their distinct needs. At some point, many of your IT teams have set about trying to integrate these siloed tech stacks, be it moving data back and forth between them or siphoning information into a data lake. But it's often been a whole lot harder than first thought and frequently fails to meet the desired benefits. Being able to run a report isn't the same as being able to plan and coordinate how we work. And that's what CX needs to happen. This is what we've built at Omnipresence. Our Omnipresence platform is built on the same Microsoft business technologies that you're using across your customers or your companies today to manage how you work and communicate, delivering the edge-to-edge solution to all your customer operations, physical, digital, or hybrid, and puts you on course to being able to design and deliver great CX programs because you know what's planned, what's happened, and how well it worked, and can course correct in real time. It's clever too. It has to be because you're working in a world where each and every customer expects you to value them as individuals, not as segments. If we can work together, we can focus on the plan that's going to maximize that total customer value with confidence that our journeys are inclusive, our tactics are relevant, our engagement does not overwhelm, and the experiences we deliver are memorable and positive. It's worth taking a moment to talk about you, though. We spend so much time thinking about our customers in all their glorious variety that you and your thousands of colleagues in your own companies often get overlooked. Their experience matters. It's what makes CX possible, as it's only through being able to bring about better ways of working that this level of real-time insight and intelligent collaboration becomes possible. The human needs of employees have been largely ignored in how customer systems have evolved. Beyond territories, targets, and approvers, the focus has been on solving external challenges. Fixing this is a key focus of Microsoft's through their modern workplace program, and something that Exeevo are designing into our platforms, be it collaboration via Teams, functional content via Power Platform, or expertise mapping via Azure. So let's remind ourselves where Matt started. From vision to victory, more value for the business, more value for the customer. Aligning our CX initiatives to commercial goals, taking an integrated approach. Teams and departments are always going to have priorities and objectives that are specific to their roles, but the success measures that define how well you're delivering on the expectations you're setting with your customers and the positive memories you're working so hard to achieve need to sit across your entire customer organization and be how you're assessing how well you're doing. That's what you need to be able to do to address the challenge and opportunity of CX with confidence. And that's what we help you do at Exeevo. You're one company amongst many, but with a mission that is uniquely yours. Your customer is one person, often in large, complex teams. You need to be able to operate as one company, unifying your teams and empowering each employee to work better so they're working towards your mission, not against it. Only then will it be possible to deliver the experience you're so focused on creating for your customers. That's what we're doing at Exeevo, helping you focus on your mission to deliver the outcomes you need and your customers value with Exeevo Omnipresence. So thank you for everyone for your attention. Matt and I hope you found this interesting and helpful. We're going to use our remaining time to open the floor to you if you had any questions you'd like to ask Matt or myself. But first, we have a couple more poll questions. So firstly, what is the main obstacle to bringing CX to your company? Is it a lack of understanding and sponsorship from leadership? Is it that it's not seen as relevant to customer operations beyond digital? Or is the technology to enable and support CX just not in place? And for the second poll question, what technology do you think you'll need to advance your CX capabilities? Is it going to be your existing CRM solution or your existing marketing automation solution? Or do you think you're going to need to do things differently? So what are you thinking about now? Let's, with that, turn the floor over to yourselves and we'll start to take questions. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today for the Vision to Victory CX Masterclass. Learn more about Exeevo Omnipresence at www.exeevo.com. Thank you.